Okay, hello everyone, and we are live on MBA Waves. Welcome. Today we have with us a special guest, Laetitia Rella, who I'm going to introduce in a second, but I'll just introduce what MBA Waves is about for a second. MBA Waves was founded nearly a year ago as a platform to talk about all things related to MBA, GMAT, applications, business schools, and so forth. And my co-founder, Bara, is, as always, here with me. Bara, you want to introduce yourself and City
Sure.
Test?
Sure. Welcome everyone who's joining us today. I'm Bara Superior City Test Prep. We're a full-service test preparation company that deals with GMAT, GRE, the EA, other tests, and help students get their best scores.
Thanks, Bara. And once again, my name is Eric Lucrezia. I'm the founder of Candidate Coach, and I do admissions consulting for people applying for MBAs and master's programs, executive MBAs all over the world. And well, you can see my website on my little name bar over there. And this week on MBA Waves, we're talking about resumes or CVs, depending where you're from, depending what you call them. MBAwaves.com is the website that has the whole programming schedule. And you can also click on watch past episodes to see recordings of previous episodes. And there's loads of good info where each week we have a different theme, different topic, and often guests who join us to share their insights. And so today we have Laetitia Rella, who is French, but living in Barcelona.
Exactly.
Working for EADA Business School. So Laetitia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks a lot, first of all, Eric and Bara, for inviting me. Yes, I'm French, so I'm sorry probably for my accent. And I've been living in Barcelona for many years already, for about 15 years. So I'm a Barcelonian by heart. And I'm part of the admissions team for 10 years already in EADA Business School. And I'm now the admissions director for international degree programs, so mainly masters and MBAs.
Congratulations. So you've seen a lot of CVs in your day.
I did. So that's why I'm very excited to be here today.
Yeah, and I miss Barcelona so much. As you know, I used to live there, and well, it's been 10 years in Paris, so we kind of like switching around.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, depending where you're from, you might call it a CV, you might call it a resume, and just to make the difference, for me, they're more or less the same thing. I know in the States, where I originally come from, people often think of a CV as something that's longer, like often like at the PhD level or something more academic. And a resume is something that people more typically call that document that we send for applying for jobs or applying for schools. I don't know, Bara, if you want to chime in from your West Coast perspective.
Yeah, I usually think about a resume when I see them that it's going to be a one-page document. And that if it's not a one-page document, it raises my eyebrows to say, like, why didn't you fit this on one page? Because if you had a CV, you can have multiple pages. So the CV, I think, gets into the weeds. Like, you might want to get into your publications more, or you might want to talk about, it's more, I wouldn't say it's a narrative, but it really gets into the weeds more. That's my impression of the two different documents. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a cultural impact on as far as like how you structure, what you include, and the length of it. Often in the engineering field, resumes or CVs tend to be very long. In the MBA world, we tend to use them interchangeably. Like recruiters, we're doing events all over the world, and we're meeting with people coming from all over the world. So we kind of use the two CV and resume interchangeably. But I'm quite used to using the word CV, so I'm just going to say that from now on, CV versus the two of them. So I just want to introduce what I consider the four axes of what constitute a CV, what are going to determine the contents and structure of your CV. And these are the four axes in my mind: the industry that you're working in or targeting, the country, and not necessarily where you're from, but where you're applying to business school, the goal, in this case, it's applying for an MBA, but it could be applying for a job, it could be an internship, it could be a volunteer experience, and your personality. That will also influence, what you include. You show a little bit of yourself, right? And so those four things are going to very much determine, like I said, the contents and structure, and you want to adapt your CV to correspond to that, in this case, applying for an MBA program. When I refer to industry, so it's like, what sector do you work in? What industry are you targeting? And that might influence how you structure your CV. And the country, there's definitely, like I said, a cultural aspect to your CV or resume. And I don't think it's the end of the world when I, as a recruiter, when I used to work for ESSEC here in France, that I get a CV that is formatted to a country that's different. You know, we're used to, like I said, seeing CVs from all over the world. So it's not a big deal. However, I think it's a nice boost in your favor if you try to adapt it to the cultural norm of that country. That sends a signal that you're paying attention, that you're internationally minded, and that you care enough to make that effort. Laetitia, what do you think about that?
No, I totally agree. I mean, first of all, it's true that you have to adapt your CV to according to the country where you're applying to. So there's general rules, and I guess you can here say more than me about the US and the UK, which are very specific rules for CV, like not including, for instance, the picture or not including certain personal data. While in other countries, like I can speak for myself, or Spanish or French recruitment, it's totally fine. So the first rule would be here to adapt and to show your empathy, right? It's who is reading you, who is the person reading your CV. So is it a recruiter or is it admissions? What are they looking for? What do you want to present in 30 seconds? Because at the first screen is in 30 seconds or minutes. If you agree with me, the first screen that you do before any step of an admissions would be, okay, what I'm looking for, and as a candidate, that's what you want to show in those 4 steps that you were describing, Eric. So yeah, I mean, I agree on the structure, and I agree on adapting to the country where you're applying to. And back on the international mindset that you were saying, I think there's a few details that we're looking for, and that shows that you're international, even if you didn't have any international experience. So for example, putting the city where you're living or the country, so we can see if we want to invite you for an interview, we can calculate the time zone. Putting the country code in front of a telephone, so I don't have to Google the country code. Things like that show already that you're ready for applying internationally.
So let me just ask you the converse question. Like, if you get a CV from someone somewhere else in the world and they don't adapt to the Spanish standards, is that a deal breaker?
No, it's not. It's fine, totally fine. You don't judge so fast on anyone. We're not here to judge. We're here to obviously try to understand, right? As a recruiter, as coach, as admissions from any side, the three of us, we're here for that. So it's not a deal breaker, but it's definitely nice when you see that someone has made the effort to adapt the CV for the business school they're applying to. So even mentioning that in their goal.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, empathy works both ways, right? And let's not forget people who are applying for an MBA program to learn something, right? But like I said, I think it's like a good boost if they do make that effort and try to adapt to the cultural norms of the country that they're applying to. Anything on the Bara side?
I'm just thinking about different resumes that I get that come in and how different they are. Some of the which is obviously I'm not an MBA program, but sometimes I get resumes and I wonder what you think about this and if this even happens, where I get people's like government documentation as part of their resume. And I'm always like, no, don't send that. Like, I'm not supposed to see that. I don't need to know your numbers. I don't need to know. And I'm always so curious, like, do those ever come through? Because I think that might be a cultural norm, in some places that's not what you do in the United States for resumes.
There's definitely a data protection thing that's like social security numbers in the States are very sensitive since kind of like the internet came about and there was a lot of, identity theft and fraudulent things happening. I've seen all sorts of stuff, things that have really surprised me, even things like height, weight, religion. Every country has their norms. In France, it's very typical to put the fact that you have a driver's license on your CV. In the States, you would never do that because it's kind of, first of all, who cares? Second of all, we assume everyone has a driver's license. In Italy, it's very standard. I always see this thing on the bottom, like, according to the law of whatever, I give you permission to look at this CV and to read it. It's like, we don't really need that. I'm trying to think what other little quirks I've noticed. But
I guess right?
Or family relationships, right?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Marriage, children, all that kind of stuff too.
Pets.
Yeah. And a lot of that stuff appears in what I call the header. The header is that thing that's on top where it has like your name and all this kind of identity information and the things you want to include or not include. And so the things that come to mind besides your name definitely want to include a phone number, as Laetitia said, with the country code. I think Americans are most guilty of that, of forgetting to include their country code. Whereas Europeans, they're used to being surrounded by all sorts of other countries, people coming in from all over, that they just have the reflex to put their country codes. That's usually like France would be +33, US +1, of course. So always remember to include the country code, just one phone number. We don't want to have to choose between 3 different phone numbers. The only exception I might add is if you have a WhatsApp number that's different than your phone number, you want to include that. That could be fine. Email address, obviously. And again, just one. We don't have to like figure out which one you want to use. I think nationality is very important. And if you're a dual or triple national, that's only to your advantage. It shows your diversity and complexity as an individual, plus the capacity to live and work in at least 2 or perhaps 3 countries. That's very cool. So definitely want to include your nationality. As Laetitia said, where you are. Like, I think, in my opinion, city and country is enough. So like, as Laetitia said, if you want to set up an interview, if admissions wants to set up an interview with you, we know when to contact you and not to disturb you in the middle of the night. However, on the CV itself, I don't think the full address is necessary because that will appear in the application. And like, we're not sending any postcards at this point to you. So just the city and country is fine. And I think the LinkedIn URL is always a good thing to have. And again, it sends a signal that you're, into networking, you're professionally minded. And if you haven't done this already on your LinkedIn, if you didn't know, you can customize what's called a slug. That's the last bit on your URL. So it's not just this lengthy string of letters and numbers, but something like just your name is simple enough. And that makes it look a bit neater on your CV itself and saves space rather than having this long thing. And finally, I would say those things, the LinkedIn and the email address, should be hyperlinked and clickable just to make everyone's life easier, that most likely you're going to send your CV by a digital pathway, right? Papers on the way out, thankfully. And so make it easy for everyone and make them clickable. There's the kind of optional things or things that might appear depending on the country, like Laetitia mentioned photo. It's very typical in continental Europe to have a photo, and other countries as well. Certainly not in the English-speaking world. I don't know if either of you want to comment on that, but photograph is typically frowned upon, whether you're applying for a job or a business school or an MBA program. I think it's linked to fears of discrimination potentially. Yeah. So, and same with date of birth. In the English-speaking world, date of birth and photo are generally avoided.
We've got a couple questions in the chat room.
Do you? I can't see them, so can you?
Oh, sure. So Bryn has asked, when applying for the US, we talked a little bit about this, is it best to do a 1-page resume?
So let's talk about those. So MBA world, what are your feelings on page length?
For me, 1 or 2 pages are fine. More than 2 pages, you lose yourself, right? And as an MBA candidate, you want to show that you're able to pitch yourself. You're able to be structured. You're able to understand where you're from and where you go. And you're able to do that in a very clear way, which is one of the skills that we ask in the classroom, obviously. So that the first step is your CV. So 1 page is perfect. 2 pages is fine. I think there's some schools that are only requiring 1 page, but in that case, it would put it very clearly in the admissions website.
So you make a couple of great points. Like, first of all, getting to the point is a skill. And if you can demonstrate that with your CV as a first means of contact, right? Like having the same level of impact with less words, less pages, less time, money, and so forth. There's that 10-second rule, right? Like they say, a recruiter, whether it's a company or a school, if they can't figure you out in 10 seconds, they're turning the page to the next one. So you want to have direct impact. And I think there's something really nice about having your CV all on just 1 page. I mean, I'm 45 years old. I have my CV on 1 page. If I can do it, so can you. Really highlighting the things that are most impactful. And the other thing you said, Laetitia, was about some schools only accept 1-pagers, and that's true. It's very important to check the website of the schools. Usually the admissions tab of the MBA web page will say what they're expecting. 1, 2 is acceptable, so always follow their rules. Sometimes they'll even have a template that you can download and work from if they prefer that. Definitely follow. And if it's not clear, you can always ask. That's what recruiters are there for, right? Laetitia, I'm sure you never have an issue if somebody asks you questions like that, right?
That's rule number one, always ask. When you're not sure, always ask. And that's why the admissions team is here. And we don't want you to lose your time by doing something that at the end you have a lot of doubt, right? So just reach out and we're here to help. So yeah, for sure.
Totally. So that's the header. That's what's going right up top. But by the way, Bara, were there any other questions that I didn't?
Yeah. Another one was, why do you recommend the LinkedIn URL when they have your detailed resume?
Very good question.
Which I think, well, I mean, what I would say about that is that your LinkedIn profile looks very different than your CV, right? Your LinkedIn profile, you have activities, you have the groups that you're a part of, you have videos that you might be in. Like, it's a much more robust launching pad of who you are versus a static resume, which is 1 or 2 pages. So, right. So by having your LinkedIn, they can also see who you're connected to. I mean, this isn't Facebook, right? You're not seeing what you're doing on weekends and kitten photos, right? You're seeing who you are as a business professional. So it makes sense to me that your LinkedIn profile will give a much more robust 3-dimensional peering into who you are. What would you both say?
I mean, if I can jump in, I totally agree. And actually, that would be one of the tips that I would recommend to anyone applying to a school, which is connect with the recruiter, because you might be surprised. You might see that you have people in common with the school or with the recruiter, and you can reach out to those people in your network or secondary network and ask directly what was their experience like. So for you, it's great as a candidate to see who you have in common, to follow the school, because the same thing that what we just said about the CV and getting 3-dimensional for recruiters, that the CV is, okay, 1 or 2 pages, and the LinkedIn adds a lot more to what you're following, what you're recommending. The same goes the other way around. So as a candidate, you might want to read first the brochure or the website, but see what are the updates and what the feeling of the school, what the recruiter is, what they liking, and what type of activities there is around, which is much more than a brochure. So it's both-sided, right? For us to understand who is behind this CV, what is your activity, and for you as well, who is behind this brochure and this website, and what is the type of activity. So definitely one of the first steps in your research is adding the LinkedIn. And if you have not done so, then in the CV, and then the recruiter will probably ask a connection.
Absolutely. I've always seen the LinkedIn as kind of complementary to your CV. Like Bara was saying, it's something more dynamic, robust. There's so many other elements you can have. As Laetitia was saying, it shows all the connections you have. And I think that's what it's all about. It's about connecting with someone. Mm-hmm. The CV is like basically a springboard for a conversation. So it has some really key elements that are going to be eye-catching, that are going to be of interest, and hopefully provoke questions on their part to want to go deeper and understand who you are and what you're about. And the LinkedIn gives a lot of those things. It also, like I said earlier, I think it sends a signal that you're professional, you're serious, you're trying to grow your network, and you're looking to connect globally, which I think an MBA is very much about a global career. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of things, mostly the stuff up top, which I call the header. What is the first section? I'm going to ask Laetitia, what do you think the first body section should be in the CV?
Well, here there are 2 options. One of the executive summary, which is not mandatory, but it's nice, or just going to your professional experience. Definitely between professional experience and academic, you have to go for the professional experience first.
And why do you think that is? Why is that the case?
Well, because as an MBA student, we want to read about your experience, what have been your achievements, what have you done so far, obviously, what type of industries you're in, if you have lived and worked in different countries. So that goes before the academia, because it's not on the master level, obviously, at this point in the MBA. You're bringing to the table, you're bringing to the MBA class your background. So that's what the recruiter will want to see.
That's a good distinction between applying for a master's degree versus an MBA, right? Because an MBA, by definition, is you have work experience. So it makes sense that the first thing you're going to have is showing your work experience. Versus if you're applying for a master's degree, you might not have any, maybe very little, but you would show your educational credentials first, and then get into like maybe internships if you had.
Yeah. And then for the executive summary, it's in my opinion, it's optional, but it's great. I mean, that helps, right? It's once again, it's the ability to pitch that we were saying before. So it's once again, it's a small pitch about yourself, about presenting, about highlighting anything that you think should be highlighted and not clear enough in the CV. So, and that's where you can personalize with the school name.
So how long do you think that should be, the executive summary?
About 4 or 5 lines. Not so much.
I think really depends on the person, what experiences they've had, especially if maybe their experiences on the CV don't jump out enough. It can be a way to showcase something that's important. So really, I think it's very personal. It's very individual. Yeah. Okay. And what about the next section? So after professional experience, what's next?
Well, after professional experience, that would be then obviously the academia and achievements. I think there's a lot to say about professional experience, and here we can give a few tips as well, which is how do you present first of all your experience, in which order, and as well what to say. And I understand sometimes after when you have several years of experience, it can get frustrating, right? To say everything in 1 page or in 2 pages, and there's a lot of things that you want to express and that you want to sell yourself, but how to summarize all of that. So the first tip is it cannot be technical. We're not a recruiter in the industry. So especially, for example, if you have a lot of technicism in your industry, in your field, let's say if you're an engineer, the recruiter for an MBA is not looking into those technicism, because we're not here to hire you as your future manager. We're here to see what have been your achievements.
Avoiding technical jargon is a good idea.
Yeah, I think so. So just make it easy for us to understand what you've been doing. And here I like to use a rule and a tip that would be what have you done, and how and why, right? Following those three lines. So what have you done, using like verbs, like action verbs. So I have increased, I have developed. Obviously avoiding basic words like done that, been there, done that, no. But what have been your achievements, and why have you done so? So I have increased the sales X% because we were as well developing that market. So putting a little bit of action sentences and following this rule of what, why, and how, it's a good start. It's not about describing your functions. It's not about describing any technicism, as we were saying, but about your leadership. So that's what a net recruiter will be looking at, MBA recruiter or your future job recruiter after that. So then that would be obviously the chronological order should go the latest first. So we can see what you're doing right now. And about experience, if there's any gap, then I guess I would depend on the person, on the school. But for us, we don't mind. Just tell us what you've been doing. Maybe you've been doing a very interesting volunteering. So I will be looking. If I see a gap, I will be looking on the back section, on the bottom section, to see what have been the volunteering, traveling, any other activity that we can understand, or education, obviously. So that's then to answer the question. Professional experience, academia. For academia, then I would avoid going back to old primary school, obviously. I mean, we don't need to know all the school that you've been doing, and just from the bachelor's up, and that's it, unless it's relevant. Obviously, if it's relevant, high school or secondary school is relevant because you've been living in another country, or you think it's a very prestigious institution, okay, you can put it, but that's it. And last section would be any additional information to get to know you. You're not only achievements, you're not only a professional, you're a candidate. We want to understand 360 degrees. So obviously all of the other achievements, courses, if your lifelong learning is a must. So any short courses that you've been doing, any other thing that can help us understand you better.
Thank you. You've brought up so many good points. Going back to the experience, besides avoiding technical jargon, which people in the MBA world won't understand anyway, and it doesn't really have any added value, having some quantifiable data, like you mentioned, like we increased sales by 20% or whatever it may be, not only does it show something measurable and some positive impact that you had, those like numbers and symbols like percentage signs and like, so forth, that actually physically stand out to the eye of the readers. That's sort of like it draws attention to itself. That's kind of cool. Second thing you also mentioned about, especially as we get on in years, it's inevitable, you accumulate so much experience that to include it on a one-page or even sometimes a two-pager can be quite difficult. And so the one kind of workaround I usually recommend is, instead of just writing experience, writing like relevant professional experience, which is indicative of that you're not putting everything, but you're putting the stuff that's most relevant and important for this thing. And that goes back to one of the axes that I mentioned in the beginning about like the things that are going to influence what you include in your CV, and goals is one of them. In this case, you're applying for an MBA program. And so knowing that that is the goal in this country, in this industry, you're only listing the things that make sense to include. And so that's to say, don't be afraid of a gap in your CV. That's a big topic for a lot of people. I hear it, especially from India. Indians seem to really be concerned about having a gap in your employment. And it doesn't mean that you haven't done anything, but be ready to explain it. You should always be ready to talk about it. And, like I said, as a CV is a springboard for conversation, that's going to evoke the question, what was this person doing? Good idea to have something on the bottom that has like some of the things you've been doing, like traveling, volunteering. There could have been a health situation that you've been dealing with, or dealing with a family member's health situation. So there's a whole host of reasons, parenthood, whatever, a war, many things can come up, and just be ready to talk about it. Of course, you have the right to also maintain an element of privacy if something very personal has happened. Find a way to talk about it so that it is explained, but still you can keep whatever's private. Also, you talked about education, not going to like kindergarten. Right, absolutely. In general, it's from university forward, unless the educational experience has brought you to a different country, or it's quite a prestigious, like in France, we have these schools called préparatoires, and some of these schools are very notable. And if you're applying to a French school, certainly that would make sense because they would know that brand, and that would really help. On the other hand, if you're applying to a school very far away, they might not know that, and it might not have any added value. So something to think about to whether include or not. And then you talked about personal interest, and I think it's very interesting that, or pertinent that you mentioned the fact that, we are here as professionals, but we're not robots, right? We're humans, and it's all about connecting and having that personal interest section. For me, it's usually like one line that lists like 3 or 4 things that you're passionate about. Like people might put those as like hobbies or interests with this kind of thing. For me, the 2 no-nos are travel and photography. First of all, everyone with a smartphone is a photographer. Tell me a little bit more. If you're truly interested in photography, you probably have a niche, like black and white portraiture photography, or like landscape photography, something a little bit more detailed. As far as travel, if there's a specific region of the world that you have an affinity for, maybe write that. Or if you've been to like 100 countries, like write that. Like that really highlights, well, what about travel?
Or like even the kind of travel, like going backwoods travel, off-grid travel, or whitewater rafting, being more specific.
Totally,
but
yes.
Post-COVID world, travel is, just the word is delectable, isn't it? But yeah, I think that I agree with you on that one. Right.
Well, I agree in putting more details, and I would definitely ask, right, in an interview, anything that I read in the CV. But travel, sometimes I see it as a way to cover a lot of candidates have never been outside, but they want to show that they are able to move in an international environment, to understand other cultures, even if they have not had yet the chance to do so, but they will during the MBA. So I see that as a way to express that, okay, maybe I've lived in my country, but I've been in contact with other cultures, and I have this flexibility, right, of especially traveling. Depending on how you travel, it can add a lot of different soft skills to your CV. So I like when I see that. I obviously like more details, as you're saying, but I understand that it's meant to show that you have these international exposures that you might not have had professionally.
Yeah, so you mentioned international exposure. Some of the things I always advise MBA candidates to be sure is visible to highlight on your CV is one, international exposure, two, teamwork, three, any kind of leadership experiences. These are the things that we're looking for, that we know that you have at least had a taste of it. Leadership, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've managed people. It could be managing budgets, projects, product management. When you're in your 20s, it's not always that easy to be trusted and given a role where you're managing people. It's normal. You're at the beginning stages of your career. But managing something shows a certain sense of responsibility, that you've taken leadership on a project, for example, or budgets or whatever. So that's a good thing. International experience comes in a variety of forms as well. Could be that you're from a bicultural family, that you've lived in multiple countries, that you've studied abroad, or you work for a foreign company, like maybe you work for a Chinese company in the States, or you have an office in another country, or most of your clients come from other countries. So this can be expressed, the international experience can be expressed in a variety of ways. And a lot of schools really have an affinity for that and even require it. They don't want people coming to the program with like zero experience with people from different cultures. And like, I think that, again, I say this a lot, it really speaks to your level of empathy, the capacity that you have to relate, to work with other people, to get along with other people, and to be successful in a global economy, basically.
That's great. We're aligned, because I was writing down before a few words about what we're looking for, and definitely, I mean, leadership, soft skills, communication skill, growth, and that would be the first one, growth. So your experience in your leadership experience has leading team, budget. It doesn't have to be team, as you were just saying. And the international exposure, it doesn't have to be experience. That's the three things that I think are key, and that's exactly the same that you just mentioned. So I see all recruiters are really aligned.
Yeah, in general, I think so. One thing we didn't talk about was skills. I don't think we mentioned it, which in my mind often comes in like language skills, but also like computer skills, or perhaps management, business skills. Where would you say that fits in, Laetitia? Do you prefer a separate section for that? I know this is very much your opinion, or maybe your EADA perspective or your Spanish perspective, but we're happy to hear what you have to say.
Well, in an European perspective, we used to do a section about that, about skills, right? Technical skills, so that would be like digital skills right now, IT digital skills, languages. There are usually sections on that, and whatever, how you feel comfortable to express about it. I think it's good if you have achieved any if you know any language, or even you can be at different level. Even if you're starting, that's great. That you're starting a new project. But it has to be true, because a lot of the recruiters know a lot of languages as well as themselves, and it's very easy to check. But yeah, I mean, feel free to put. Once again, I think the key here is to present yourself globally. So anything that can add value, you add it. If it's Word, like the IT skill or Word, Excel, and Microsoft Office, just don't put it. I mean, we assume you have that, but unless you're very advanced in Excel, for instance. But any IT skill that you think can bring value and define you, based on your experience or languages or any other skills, if you've had any certification, that's great. That's great to read about it.
Absolutely. Another thing I wanted to mention was community service and how important that is. And I have my guesses of what you're going to say between the two of you. But you want to start, Laetitia? Is it important to show volunteer experience?
Of course. That gives a whole lot of different dimension to you as an applicant. Once again, I'm back to what I was saying before. We try to understand who you are besides your professional achievements, because at the end, as a recruiter, an MBA, and you as a future MBA student, you will be living, interacting, and briefing in the class, right? You'll be interacting, briefing the MBA, interacting with all of your other classmates. It's a very immersive experience. It's once in a lifetime experience, but very immersive. So here, the soft skills matters a lot, as much as the hard skills. And how do you see the soft skills before an interview? During an interview, you can get to understand better the person, but how do you see How do you sense the soft skills with a one or two pager resume? That would be through those additional experiences that we can see. So that can be through the achievements that you describe in the professional experience, through the awards you received, and through any additional experience of volunteering. Shows a lot about how you can dedicate your time, about your empathy, about your time management skills, because we understand if you have had a very busy professional life and academic life, and you make time for giving part of your skills to a cause, that's wonderful. So definitely bet about it.
Bara?
Well, someone actually has a question of whether the volunteer experience is a requirement, and what do we do COVID, during COVID when it's been more difficult, or more opportunities really to volunteer. So what I would say about that is that because of COVID, in fact, if you have been able to volunteer or do something, even if it's on the other side of a computer, it is demonstrating a kind of leadership, right? So it demonstrates that empathy that Laetitia was just speaking about, and then also that you're actually using an opportunity where a lot of us are just stunted and creating something else. So that's where I think that comes in. And I also wanted to highlight something that both of you said. You both said the word impact when you were talking about the things that are on the resume, specifically the experience that people have. And I think that impact is a really important word for folks to consider when they're putting together their resume, because it is that launching pad. It is that springboard. And people who read want to know, what impact have you had, and what experience have had impact on you, right? So, it kind of fits that why, like the why of something, and it's the why of you and how things have affected you. So I think that's a good word for people to use as a structure to help them.
Kind of like a guiding light.
I think so, yeah.
I think volunteering is definitely welcome on a CV. I think that wherever you're applying, it will be well viewed. I think it's also an opportunity, especially for younger people who may not have had that much experience, particularly in the leadership side of things. Volunteering, as well as participating in things like sports, particularly team sports, or musical groups like orchestras and so forth, where there is a team dynamic. There's a lot of transferable skills, I think, with the field to the boardroom, let's say. In American culture, I think it's even more important. It's like volunteering and community service is, I think, a bit more ingrained in our culture than in other parts of the world. And so there might be a little bit more of an expectation to have that. But as Bara said, situations like COVID, although we were all locked in, I don't know, depending where we were when it happened, there was a lockdown for around 2 months. Once we were released from our prisons, there were many opportunities to get involved. Could be volunteering at a place where they're doing, vaccines, or perhaps collecting food or so forth. And what's going on with Ukraine right now, there's probably more opportunities that have popped up wherever you are in the world to give some of your time or knowledge or expertise, or it could be money or whatever. So yes, these are, I think, indicative of your empathy, of leadership. Not to say that you have to be managing the people at the volunteer site, but you're being a leader by volunteering. You are saying, hey, this is the right thing to do, or in my opinion, and I'm going to actually go and do it and walk the talk.
Yeah, proactiveness. That shows how proactive you are.
Absolutely.
So yeah, no, that's a lot of, as you were saying, transferable skills. And at the end, that's what we will be looking at, transferable skills, because we're talking from any professional personal experience transferable to an academic environment, to an MBA. So yeah, definitely. Good point.
We're coming to the end of our program today on MBA Waves, but if there's any more questions, now is the time to type them in. And while we're waiting for any more final questions to come in, I will ask my fellow participants today, if there's any other important things to highlight or any things to avoid on the MBA version of the CV?
Well, you talked a little bit about some of the aesthetics of the resume, and one of the things we didn't talk about is fonts or backgrounds or design, right? So I would imagine for an MBA, you want it to be as readable as possible and not have fonts that are so small. I mean, if it's an electronic document, obviously you have room, but I enjoy resumes that are creative and how they space and lay things out. I don't know, depending on the MBA program you're looking at and what the standards are, consider how you want to do the layout. Because there's traditional ones and there's ones that are much more artistic. So you don't want to go crazy because you want to make the readability really work.
Absolutely. It needs to be readable, impactful, beautiful. You know, it goes back to that 10-second rule, right? Like if I'm constantly stumbling on like, what does that say? Because it's too small, or I can't figure out what you mean, like that just slows it down. If the design is awkward, and what you talked about being more traditional or not, I mean, that's going to be very much driven by what industry we're talking about. If you're applying for a finance role, that's going to be look like a more traditional CV, pretty much black and white, standard structure and layout. Whereas if you're applying for a marketing role, this is your first chance to show them your creativity, your design talents, and you know how to pitch yourself and be eye-catching. So you might introduce color or have different like kind of panels, or the kind of common more marketing CV would be like a 1/3 and then 2/3, where in the 1/3 column you have like all the contact information, the 2/3 is kind of the rest of it. But there's resources like Canva, for example, where you have a lot of free design templates. We should be getting a cut from Canva, I think, at this point. But that's just one of many out there. And then there's like paid versions on Canva as well. And it's not even that expensive, ranging from a couple bucks to like $15. But there's many more out there that have these design templates, which are super user-friendly. And you can come up with something very attractive and appropriate for your industry. As I mentioned, the axes that will influence the structure and contents of your CV. But yes, aesthetics is definitely a part of it, Bara. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and part of aesthetics is obviously to have a look. I mean, you cannot make any orthographic errors in the
Spelling
CV.
errors,
That's a no-go, right? Punctuation. It's small details, but it shows how well you can convey a message, and it's your first presentation, basically. So yeah.
I mean, it's part of marketing, and attention to detail is the thing. It shows that you care and that you're paying attention, you're putting the effort in. You know, can you imagine you saw like a giant billboard for Coca-Cola? Like I don't want to drink that. Like, spelling counts.
Spelling counts. No, for sure. It's just your what you want to show. And actually, I can say that everybody will see your CV. There's a lot of things that not all of the committee or member of the committee are involved, but a CV for sure. I mean, there's, for example, the academic document, that would be only a certain part of the committee involved in reading that. But the CV is the first thing that we will see, and that's what everybody will see and work on and analyze. So see it as an opportunity to show, to let us understand who you are and the impact that you want to have.
Another thing I want to really quickly mention before we wrap up is that whenever you reach out to a recruiter or an admissions person or even an alum that you're reaching out to ask a question or introduce yourself or whatever, automatically include your CV in attachment. Just like last sentence, for your convenience, I've attached my resume or my CV. I mean, they're going to ask to see it anyway. So save them the trouble. Show them that you know how things work, and just make it fluid like that. And I don't think you should worry if your CV is not 100% perfectly updated in the final form that you're going to use to submit with your official application. But having something so they can understand, like, who is this person sending me an email, that they can get a snapshot of what you're all about professionally, and it just helps things move along, because they want to basically figure out, is this person who's just contacted me even remotely eligible for this program, or are they so far off that I'm going to have to redirect them to someone else? So save them the trouble of asking, and just include your CV upon first contact, even if it's not perfectly finalized yet.
It's a great tip for reaching out to alumni. A lot of people are asking, right? How do I reach out to an alumni? What's the best and smooth and respectful way to do so? Having your CV is a very respectful way, because you show that, okay, I understand your time. You might want to know who I am, so maybe we can connect afterwards at our level as well. We can be part of the same network. but here is my presentation, my idea, right? My CV. So definitely it's a good tip, and I'm sure the alumni will appreciate and will be more willing to dedicate time to your questions.
100%. All right, I think that's a wrap for me, ladies.
I think we covered a lot of topic today.
Covered a lot. Thank you so much, Laetitia, for joining us.
One thing I will mention, that you don't have to worry about paper anymore, right? Like we don't have to worry about the resume paper anymore. So that actually, there's one thing that's easier, right? That you don't have to worry about what weave of paper and how many. So that's good. But thank you so much, Laetitia. Definitely, it's great to see you.
Yeah, it was great to see you guys. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for sharing this space with me. It was really very insightful. It's always insightful to share different talks like that with people from the same sector. So I'm here for any other things that you need. And thank you for the people that were listening to us today and for all of the questions. I can see like in the chat, a lot of different questions. So thank you so much.
If any of you have any questions specifically about EADA Business School, Laetitia is always, of course, happy to hear from you. You can find her on LinkedIn, where you should all be anyway.
LinkedIn is a key.
It's totally the key. It's your best friend.
Happy to connect.
And just to say that next week, of course, as every Tuesday, we have another episode coming up titled "You Are Not Your Achievements: Balancing Success and Self-Esteem." And our guest next week is John Pissarro, who was with us once before at the end of last year, who is the founder of John Pissarro Coaching. He's an executive coach, formerly a lawyer at the OECD. So he's a really well-connected, bright, and insightful guy. So I'm excited to talk about that next week as well. As I always say, whenever we have guests, I learn, I think, just as much as the people watching the show. So thank you once again, Laetitia. Thank you, Bara, and see y'all next Tuesday.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.